Our scripture this morning comes from Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 through 16. God's kingdom is like an estate manager who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. They agreed on a wage of $1 a day and went to work. Later, about 9 o'clock, the manager saw some other men hanging around the town square unemployed. He told them to go to work in his vineyard and he would pay them a fair wage, and they went. He did the same thing at noon and again at 3 o'clock and again at 5 o'clock. He went back out and found still others standing around. And he said, "Why are you standing around all day doing nothing?" And they said, "Because no one hired us." He told them to go work in his vineyard. When the day's work was over, the owner of the vineyard instructed his foreman, "Call the workers in and pay them their wages. Start with the last hired and go on to the first." Those hired at 5 o'clock came up and were each given $1. When those who were hired first saw that, they assumed they would get far more. But they got the same, each of them $1. Taking the $1, they growled angrily to the manager, "These last workers put in only 1 easy hour, and you just made them equal to us, who slaved all day under a scorching sun." He replied to the one speaking for the rest, "Friend, I haven't been unfair. We agreed on the wage of $1, didn't we? So take it and go. I decided to give to the one who came last the same as you. Can't I do what I want with my own money? Are you going to get stingy because I am generous?" And here it is again, the great reversal. Many of the first ending up last, and the last first. And there our scripture ends. Let's consider how we'll apply these words of scripture to our lives this morning. Steve and I are going to be sharing the stage. Can you believe this? Do you think there's room enough for us both up here? We walk around, we stretch our hands out. We're going to be bumping into one another all morning long.
It was really kind of fun. So we rehearsed this, we practiced it, and we got up here and we went, "Hada, hada," at the 8 o'clock service. And afterwards, Justin said, "You were all over the place." I said, "Yeah, I kind of lost the script there in the middle." And that's kind of the fun of the dialogue sermon, is that we never know exactly what's going to happen. But first of all, look at these wonderful balloons. Some of those have been popping. Joe wanted me to tell you that all of those who have their balloons pop, he'll be available for counseling for you afterwards. Since God doesn't love you, Joe will help you process that. But I'd get in trouble for the crazy things I say. Holy cow.
Well, I'm that's what I'm here for. I'm supposed to be young and edgy and say stuff that no one else is allowed to say, right? Yeah.
So you have a card, right? You have a card. What we want you to do is I want you to think about a generous act that you want to do, that you feel called to do. And we want you to think about writing that down on the front side of the card. On the back side of the card, we want you to write down, who are you going to do this generous act for? It might be somebody specific, a family member. It might be a coworker. It might be you're going to commit yourself to doing this for a stranger coming this week. But today is Stewardship Sunday. Today is the Stewardship Sunday. Our stewardship theme is generosity with faith. And we want you to start thinking about it, is how your faith is connected to what it means to be generous. Not only generous in your giving to church, but generous in your life. So start thinking about that. And then we want you to take the card and then tie it to the balloon string, and then afterwards we're going to release the balloons. You can see the strings, the cards up there at the top of the cards attached to the balloon, blah, blah, blah. And so that at the end it'll become like our statement of our commitment of faith to be generous. All right, we continue the sermon series on Jesus is greater than Christianity. One counseling member, see Joe after church. Yeah.
That one was a child, so they're okay.
Oh. You better cover your bases
I know,
real
right?
quick.
An angel just got its wings.
That leg was not in the script, baby. That was so not in the script. Okay. Oh, Jesus is greater than Christianity. There we go. Matthew's Gospel. And last week we started with Matthew's Gospel. And through the genealogy, what I talked about is that the whole purpose of this Gospel is to take your understanding of who you are, of who Jesus is and who God is and who the kingdom of God is, and turns it right upside down. And so we saw that with the genealogy last week. And today we take one of the most controversial parables and we show you how this just turns the world upside down. And it kind of grabs us. How does this passage grab you?
You know, the thing I see over and over again as we read this was the owner goes out into the marketplace in the morning, at noon, at 3, at 5, and then at the end of the day. And each and every time, did you notice, there are people standing around, not doing anything. Every single time he walks out, there are just people everywhere, not doing anything. And he says, what are you doing? Get on in here. Get in this vineyard. I have a harvest that needs to be harvested. So come on and get in here. And here's the thing that I love about this. No matter who we are or what has happened in our lives this week or in this year, you might have come in here today thinking, I'm not good enough. Or I don't know what to do for God. Or maybe God doesn't even want me to work for God. Sometimes we feel that way. Sometimes that's the very reason why you walked into the doors this morning. And here's the thing I love about the story. The owner of the vineyard walks out. He doesn't see that. He doesn't see people who are unworthy. He doesn't see people who are unskilled. He doesn't see people who are unfit for the vineyard. Instead, the owner walks out and sees potential workers in everybody at all times of the day, no matter who they are, where they've been, what they've done. He looks out and says, hey, I need help, and you're the perfect person for it. And so one of the things I want to just put up there up front is no matter what is going on in your life this morning, God's looking at you saying, you know what? You are the perfect person to join me in my work. And that's the thing that I love about the passage. Even if you're getting in this late, sometimes I hear people go, well, some of you've grown up in church and you've done all this for all these years, and I'm just getting here on this late. Well, you know what? This story is perfect for you because it lets you know that no matter what, God still walks out and says, I don't care when you showed up, you are perfect to help me with my harvest this morning. And that's what I love about this passage. What about you, Steve? What do you think?
What I love about the passage is that when people hear this passage, they always go, that's not fair. That's not fair. These guys have been working all day long in the scorching sun, and these people have been hired throughout the day, and at the end of the day, they've only been working it for an hour. They get paid first. They get paid the same amount, and so the people standing in the back of the line are going, oh, wow, that's cool. They paid them the whole day wage? Then I'm going to get paid like 10 times that much. And when they get all the way up to the front, the landowner hands them the same amount, and they go, that's not fair. That's not fair. And what I love about it is that when we say that's not fair, it's because we've identified with those working at 8 o'clock. That's what these parables do. That's what the parables do that make it so upsetting for people, is they force you to identify with a certain character in the story. Everybody identifies with the 8 o'clocker. Everybody says, that's who I am. I've been scorching under the heating. God, blah, blah. I've been working under the scorching sun all day long. Surely I'm going to get paid. We never identify with those who are hired at 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock, because that would mean that we're a slacker, a Johnny-come-lately. No, we have been working faithfully for the kingdom of God. And Jesus turns that upside down and says, maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe you're the one who's just getting your nose under the tent, and God is just now welcoming you in. And Jesus wants you to identify with maybe somebody else than just this 8 o'clocker. And what's really interesting is how come none of us identify with a landowner? How come none of us see ourselves as being the one who is being generous? We always identify ourselves as being on the receiving end. How come we don't say, I'm like that landowner? I am just somebody who is out there being generous. And that's what I love about it. It challenges us to think. And what I love is the Jesus Seminar. Think about, you've heard Justin and I talk about this. In 1980s, 80s to 1990s, there was a group of scholars that called the Jesus Seminar that got together to study who was the historical Jesus. And actually, a lot of what Justin and I teach and believe is based upon the findings of the Jesus Seminar. Marcus Borg, somebody a lot of you have read, is a part of that Jesus Seminar. One of the things that they said, these parables are actually windows back to the historical Jesus. That, you know how a really good joke is kind of passed around? That's like the parables were. They were passed around because they were so unique. And he said, that's why when we see these parables, we can look back and actually see the historical guy. So it begs the question, why did the historical Jesus tell this parable?
Well, I think the key thing you need to remember is the point that Steve has been making over and over again for the past few months. Jesus was uneducated, poor, illiterate. He's been making this idea that he's the theological savant. And the reason we say that is because he had no religious education. He did not belong in the teaching spot that he kind of took on and took by force himself. This guy, Jesus, was not supposed to be kind of the faith and spiritual guru of his day. Jesus came from Nazareth. What we know about Nazareth, this is a podunk town all the way north in Palestine. It is very removed from Jerusalem, from the politics, the economics, the education of Jerusalem. If you lived in Nazareth, and this phrase is in Scripture, they would say, well, nothing good comes out of Nazareth. Okay? It was one of the worst places to grow up in. And it wasn't just on the edge of Jewish geography, it was on the edge of Jewishness itself. A place like Nazareth, being up north in Palestine, every empire that had come through there over the centuries, starting back with the Egyptians and the Assyrians and the Babylonians and then the Greeks and then the Romans, what they would do is they would transplant people from one spot in the empire to another. And so what took place here in this area of Nazareth is that the people who were actually there weren't 100% Jewish. And that was a problem for the religious leaders down in Jerusalem. They looked at people in Nazareth, and I hate to use this phrase, but it's the way that they would have phrased it. They were half-breeds. Okay? That was the ethnic slur that they would throw at people in Nazareth. And so Jesus grew up in a culture where that was the norm. He and the people around him were considered to be the bottom ethnically. Also, economically, it was an issue too, because being up there was all kinds of Roman fortified cities that they were building up north in Palestine. And people like Jesus, who was a day laborer, would go to the cities and work for the Romans in their cities, building their walls, building their pagan temples. And if you were a Jewish religious leader looking at someone like Jesus, well, that was the worst thing that you could do on a daily basis. On top of that, the other people who weren't working in stone and carving and carpentry and all that, they were working in the fields. Well, the Romans were known for coming into a land and taking over all of the fields and all the plantations so that the Romans owned them. So if you weren't laboring in the cities, you were laboring in the fields that the Romans owned, and the Jewish leaders would not have liked you then. You were considered to be compromised. So when Jesus shares this story, what he's really doing is being subversive to the dominant religious story of the Jewish leaders of his day. Jesus takes what everyone considers to be accepted religious and spiritual kind of wisdom and says, that's not how God works. God doesn't look at some people as outsiders. God doesn't look at certain people and say, you're not good enough, or you're not Jewish enough, or you're not whatever. No, the owner walks out of the vineyard into the marketplace and sees each and every person as a potential worker, no matter how on the edge of Jewish society that they were. And that's what I love about this passage. Jesus, the historical Jesus, turns religion on its head. And Steve, I think that's where, when we're talking about this, we get in this idea of who we are today. And we're not necessarily on the edge of society. We're kind of more on the privileged side of things. So why don't you explain a little bit how this applies to us?
Not yet.
Not yet. He just never stays on script.
So, every time I hear you talk about this, I kind of get captivated. All right, so I'm a peasant, and Jesus is telling me this story.
Uh-huh.
So how do you think they identified with it? Did they identify with it from that they were working at 8 o'clock? Because if they're peasants, are they identifying that they're the 8 o'clock workers, the 10, the 2, the 4? Where are they? Right. Where do they identify?
I think the big thing is I don't even think they thought they would even get invited into the vineyard at all, let alone not even being late in the time there. I think they identified as the people who do not get called into the vineyard to help with the work of God. And so the Jesus' original hearers would hear this story and go, awesome, God has something for us to do. I think Matthew, using the story, has something a little bit different in mind. Do you want me to explain that, or do you
Yeah,
want to
no,
explain that?
well, no. Before you go there.
Yeah.
So, again, we're way off script. All right. So which is makes these things fun. So, who does the peasant who's hearing this story think the landowner is? Do they think it's? Well, let's just answer it. Who do they think the landowner is?
Well, I think when the original listeners to Jesus' story hears this and identifies the landowner as anyone who is kind of in the religious know. Not necessarily just God, but people who are considered to be religious and spiritual. They're the ones who invite people in and keep people out. And so for me, I think when I hear the story, then I come back to us and I go, who are we? I mean, some of us come in and go, I hope I can be a worker. But as we're trying to make this transition here in the sermon, I'm trying to help you understand that we have to move from being just a worker and just a laborer to seeing ourselves as people with vineyards, as being people who do have so many blessings in our lives. And so I think when Matthew shares the story, he's shifting this and saying, are you the owner? Will you be the owner? Will you look at other people who are out there and invite them in?
So when we get put back on script, I mean, so that you have to ask the question, okay, so this was the historical Jesus who told the story. Matthew writes 50 years later. It's like, if Jesus was living in 1960 and we're now writing a gospel in 2012 about this guy who lived in 1960, and this is, and again, an illiterate society. They only have oral stories. And there's this Q source that Justin and I have been talking about, that provides the source for Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So Matthew is taking specific stories for a specific message to his community. What we know about his community is that they were very wealthy, very well educated.
This is why I let him do this part of the sermon.
Wealthy, well educated. And you might not say wealthy. I'm not wealthy. I'm not wealthy. Do you know, for those of it, if you've traveled around the world, I got to tell you something. The poorest among us are living as kings compared to the Bedouins I saw when we were going through Jordan, through the folks that you saw in Greece, the folks that we know and our brothers and sisters in Central America, even compared to our brothers and sisters in downtown Denver. We're living like kings. We're highly educated. We're Matthew's community. And so I think what happens is that Matthew is, as Matthew tells the gospel, he knows his people are identifying as the 8 o'clock workers. I think what Matthew wants them to do is identify themselves as the landowner. Because they're landowners. They are hiring people. They're firing people. They own vineyards. He challenges their sense of generosity. He challenges their notion of how are you treating your people justly? Are you paying a fair wage? He challenges this whole notion of what is fairness. He says, are you, the landowner, being generous with your workers out in your vineyard? He'd say, are you working out in your vineyard? Because you all have vineyards. Will you say anything more about the landowner?
Yeah, I think it's really important for us to take this in. I mean, Steve just said, we live like kings than the majority of the world. And how often do we take that for granted? How often do we overlook that fact in our lives? We have so many blessings. And it's just part of normal life. I was thinking today, we have all these great singers up here. Colin started out the service. Sarah Rex and the team are up here. And we hear that every single Sunday. And it just kind of becomes the norm, right? But then for me, I was gone in Greece and Turkey for 2 weeks. For two Sundays I was missing. And I came in last Sunday and I was like, oh, wow. Oh, the music is fantastic. But you forget. You forget because it's there all of the time.
The preaching is fantastic.
The preacher is awesome.
Fantastic.
Especially when he stays on script.
Yeah.
Those rare moments. Yeah.
Hey, you be quiet.
But we take things for granted, and we don't often realize that we are the owner. You know, Steve had a sermon series last fall about being sent. And if that sermon reminds us of anything, it reminds us that we have vineyards that need to be harvested. And a lot of our fields are laying unharvested, just kind of going out there and kind of going to waste because we're not inviting people in to help us harvest our lives. When we think about it, when you encounter people on a daily basis, each one of those people are an opportunity for you to give some generosity to bring them into your life. People out there that are part of your family and part of your workplace and part of the strangers that you meet every day, those are all potential partners for you to help harvest the vineyards that God has given you. And what happens when you see them, when you look at them, when you talk to them and engage them and say, hey, I've got some great things going on in my life. God has given me wonderful things. Come and join me in that. When we do that, we just turn the entire religious conversation upside down. Because that's not how people encounter it out there. I was with some friends last evening, and I've just recently become friends with them over the past few weeks. You know, and they're kind of getting used to the fact that I'm a minister and stuff, and we joke about that, and I'm going to be getting a T-shirt that says, it's okay, I'm a minister. Because of all the crazy things I do out there in the world. But the interesting thing is, as much as I can be a real person with them and be kind of an atypical minister, the more they want to come to church. The more I'm not the typical religious person, the more they want to come and be a part of this place because they go, wow, if you have the freedom to just be you, maybe I could come to that place and have the freedom to just be me. That's the kind of grace, that's the kind of generosity that this story offers up. That people out there, that they can come into the vineyards, our vineyards, and be a part of what God is doing in our lives. You know, Steve shared some stories with me this week about that kind of generosity. I want him to share it with you right now.
You know, for me, being generous is there's two things. It's coming in and it's going out. Teaching you how to be generous out there. And you know, and part of it is we have to wake up to ways of being generous. I love the quote, and I've been misquoting it ever since I quoted it, so help me if I get it right. So the quote, practice random acts of kindness and senseless acts of beauty. Yeah. So random and senseless. It's so spontaneous. Like, you know, sometimes we get so in track with, okay, I got to get up at such and such time, eat breakfast, I got to be commuting by such and such, get to work, I have to meet the deadlines, you know, I've got this to do and this to do and this to do, got to get home, da, da, da. And because we get so tunnel vision, we forget that to stop and look around at the people around us, and how can we act in random, spontaneous, and do sometimes senseless things that ultimately make a lot of sense. And I just have two examples from my own life, and I'm not putting these out there to make myself any kind of saint, but as a way of saying, this is what happens. I was at Big R up in Conifer. Big R is my ranch supply store that I go to quite a bit up in Conifer.
A store you will never find me in, by the way.
I'm going to get you on a horse yet. All right. So I'm in Big R, and I've got my stuff that I need, and I'm checking out. And I'm at the checkout thing, and the owner comes up and he says to checkout people, do you guys have any Tums? And they say, Tums? He goes, yeah, I have some serious heartburn. You know, I've got 4 more hours. I don't think I'm going to be able to make it. And they start looking around for some Tums. You know, look in the drawers, under the counters. And they go, no, we don't have any Tums. He's going, oh, my gosh, I don't think. And then he kind of walks away. And I'm checking out. I'm going, I can take care of this. And so I finish checking out, go get in my car, and go to King Soopers. And I look for Tums, find Pepsid. Tums and Pepsi. One of these will work. And I go to checkout, go to the self-checkout, where you scan it yourself. Scan. It says $20. I kind of froze. $20, that's a lot. And that's when I felt God whap me on the head. Quit being so stingy. It's only $20. So, okay. So, and I go back in line, check out, and when I set Tums and Pepsi down on the counter, and the checkout says, "What's this?" "Oh, this is for your boss." And she goes, "Huh?" "Well, he has, the heartburn." And she looked at me like, "How did you know?" "Lady, I was just in here 10 minutes ago." And it was they acted like I had parted the waters, and that I had just fed the 5,000. And I wanted to say, "It's just Tums." But as I walked out, you could hear the buzz as far as, "Wow, do you imagine someone?" And I was going, is it really that big of a deal? Is this so rare that people do a random something, And then my wife told me a story a couple weeks ago. She was in the post office. She went to the post office, and she walked in, and she was the only one there. And so as soon as she kind of walked in and started walking up to the counter, and the postal employee was right there, the postal boss, Postmaster, thank you, comes out and goes postal on her, on the employee, and just kind of, I can't really say rips her a new one, but I just did.
You did.
So, yeah. Just goes after her. And in front of Phoebe. And Phoebe's like, as this woman is yelling at the employee, and that it's just shocking. Have you ever been in this where it's just shocking? And the boss left. And the employee, the woman, turns to Phoebe, and she's got tears in her eyes, and says to Phoebe, she tries to hold it together, "What can I do for you?" And Phoebe says, "No, what can I do for you?" And she reached across and just kind of grabbed hold of the lady's hand and said, "Despite what just happened, you need to know that you are a good person. You're a valuable person. You're a loved person, and I appreciate the work that you do." And Phoebe came back and she said, we get so caught off guard. She goes, as I was walking away, I realized everything I should have said. It's like, should have crawled over the counter and just smack. No, you can't do and it's always when we walk away that we go, we should have done. Well, I think with this parable it's saying, no, get ready. Because it's random. And it's senseless. And you have to be ready to go out. Because what happened is that I think that we send ripples out through the community when we do these things. We don't know. I don't know. This is just Tums. But how did it change those employees? How did it change that woman? Because...
Well, I think that's the greatest thing about this. Stories, right? That's the kind of thing when you get home at night and you look at your partner and say, "You will never believe what happened to me today. I was standing in line at
Big R
at Lowe's, Home Depot, when this guy comes up and gives the worker some Tums. You'll never believe, I was at the post office today, and I saw this lady get ripped a new one, and this other lady who was just there to drop off some mail came up and put her hand on that postal worker. Those are the kind of stories we go home and share. Those are the kind of stories we come into work and go, "Hey, this great thing happened." Stories. And that's why Jesus shares stories. Those stories change the entire way that we see our world. They change the way that we see our lives. Change the way that we see God. Those kinds of stories are the things that we want people to tell about us as people, as individuals, and also as Columbine United Church. When I walked into this place this morning before the 8 o'clock service, I met two new individuals who would come here to visit this morning. And as Steve and I often do, we go, "Well, what brings you to Columbine United Church? How'd you hear about us?" And both individuals said, "I have heard incredible things about this place, and I had to come and check it out. Those are the stories of grace out there. People hear about us as individuals and as a church and go, I want to be around people like that. I want to go experience a God like that, because that changes everything. If it's even halfway what I've heard it is, that could change my life. And so the ripples end up going out because we're shouting out those stories. We're looking at people and talking to people and engaging with people and inviting them in, and they say, hey, you never guess who invited me into their life to participate in this amazing thing. Those acts of grace and generosity are just simple things. Just really simple, by literally looking at someone and saying, hey, come be a part of something that is incredible in my life. Come be a part of something that God is doing in my life.
You know, what was really fun was, we were at this point in our planning where we said, okay, how are we going to end? And we said, well, let's talk about Tums. And Justin says, well, what do you think is the tagline for Tums? I said, I don't know, let's Google it. And so Justin Googled it. He goes, look at this. He said the tagline is anytime, anywhere. I said, that's perfect. You're supposed to go relieve gas anytime, anywhere. You know, the generosity is supposed to be anytime, anywhere. Random, senseless. You have to be ready to go. Did I really say that in church?
You did. You just did. We've said so many things this morning.
You know, that you have to be out there ready to respond. You know, it's like part of your pledge card this morning. You know, it is important that we like turn on the lights, pay the bills, pay the salaries. You know, we don't have a mortgage anymore. Wahoo! Yeah. But it's really, this creates, your pledges create a community where you get to practice generosity. You get to practice generosity. You get to learn how to be generous with each other, with children, with, you know, the mission committees, all the different things, all the different fellowship communities you get to practice. Because what really needs to happen is generosity out there. This is practice. Where it really happens is out there. And that's why your pledge card is so important to us. But this card on the balloon, that's what is ultimately important. Because it's what you're going to do with your life. We're a good practice. But what are you going to do with your life? And so, in a moment, we're going to have you come up. If you have your pledge cards, you can put your pledge card up here on the table. I know a lot of you pledge electronically. How do they pledge electronically?
Well, there's a couple ways to do that. I mean, first of all, in order to get the information about it, the best thing to do is if you just grab this bulletin here, there's these tear-off cards on the bottom. If you just write us a note and say, hey, I'm interested in pledging electronically or giving electronically, then someone from the office will contact you and share with you how to do that. There's a whole form you have to fill out, and that's probably the best way for us to get a hold of you.
Very good. And soundboard, give me the camera, bring it right up to my face. Can you do that? Bring it right up to my face. I know. Tell me when you're right up on my face. Are you there yet? Okay. Hold up. Here's the reason why I'm doing this. We have a new virtual community that's attending Columbine United Church. On any given Sunday, over 100 people participate in our worship services virtually. We have people in New York City, in Minnesota, and Washington, D.C., a lot of people who don't come to church, attend church virtually. So here's my message to you. If you're attending virtually, we want you to also participate in the generosity. We want you to fill out a pledge card. We want you to write a card. You are a part of this community, not physically, but virtually. And that's just as important because you're practicing the message of this faith where you are and where your life is. So we also want you to fill out that pledge card and join us in this ministry. Thank you for being a part of the virtual community of Columbine United Church. So the rest of us, after we say the prayer, in the part of the offertory, we want you to come up and put your pledge card if you're ready, fill it out electronically if that is better, and then release your balloons as a source of dedicating yourself to being generous people. Justin, would you pray?
God, we come here for so many different reasons, bring lots of different concerns into the room. Some of us don't feel good enough. We don't feel loved, wondering if we can be used for anything good. Lives are so screwed up, we wonder how in the world we could ever contribute to the dream that you have for our world. And yet you walk into our lives and say, come and work with me. Come be a part of my harvest and vineyard. Some of us, God, have shown up really early, and we think we've been working so hard, and we look around at other people and think that they should not get what we deserve. Remind us that all of us are equal in your eyes. You look at all of us the same. You love us just the same. God, more than anything, help us to shift our minds and our imaginations to imagine that we are owners of vineyards, that you have placed so many things in our lives that need to be harvested, and that we need to go out into the world and invite other people to partner with us and be a part of our world, that we can literally write acts of generosity on a card and float it up to you, and that you're going to honor that generosity, and that stories will be told about us, about our church, about our lives. And in doing so, the ripples will go across our entire world. God, you remind us over and over again that your blessings are all around, and that heaven is literally coming to earth. And so we sing that prayer that people have been saying for 2,000 years ago.